A police chief charged with a hate crime, convicted of lying to the FBI, will now face no penalty for striking a handcuffed teenager who's black, even though his fellow officers, the people that work for him, said he's racist and that his actions were illegal. They testified against him and made secret recordings of his racism. Not going to have a penalty for what he did to the teenager, and the story has another twist. All right, federal prosecutors, they tried. They have now dropped hate crime assault charges against Frank Nucera Jr., a former Bordentown police chief accused of slamming the head of a handcuffed black suspect against a door jamb back in 2016. Now, the federal prosecutors, they tried to prosecute this guy multiple times. They took it to a jury. They tried to get a conviction, a grand jury indictment. They did get him on lying to the FBI. Let me show a picture of the guy. All right, this is the former police chief, Frank Nucera, in the background. You see him with the shades on. All right, the decision comes nearly 3 weeks after a jury deadlocked in the case for a second time, and a judge declared a mistrial for the second time. Legal experts had widely speculated that Nucera would not face a third trial, and they were correct, okay? And the federal government does this a lot. They believe a person is guilty. They may take one bite, possibly 2 bites at the apple. There's no conviction because of a hung jury, which means the prosecutor, they get another opportunity if they choose to. It's up to them to drop the charges. I typically never agree with them dropping the charges just because they cannot get the conviction. But in this case, that's what they did. All right, in a letter to the judge, Philip R. Sellinger, a newly appointed US attorney of New Jersey, said the government has determined that a third trial was not in the interest of the United States. All right. Now, I want you to remember this happened because of change in leadership at the district level of the federal prosecutor's office. Okay. Change of leadership, new person comes in, they say, hey, not in the best interest of the United States to try to prosecute this chief of police. Nucera was convicted in his first trial, which was October 2019, on a single charge of lying to the FBI. Sentenced to 28 months in prison. However, he has remained completely free on his own recognizance pending the outcome of the other charges in the case. Now, he's been convicted of a major crime here, right? He doesn't have to go to prison because he has privilege still, even when he's convicted. So he remains free. It gets deeper. Nucera once, according to the narrative, was a highly respected law enforcement veteran for 3 decades in the predominantly white Burlington County community of about 11,000 residents. He says he was relieved by Tuesday's decision. Nucera is 64 years of age, okay? He's been doing this cop thing for a long time. He was charged with federal hate crimes and deprivation of civil rights in connection with an incident at a Bordentown hotel when police arrested Timothy Stroy after he allegedly had not paid his bill. Think about what this is over. This is about not paying a bill, a civil issue, okay? He gets arrested. If convicted on those charges, this chief would have faced up to 10 years in prison, but he wasn't convicted. It was a mistrial, hung jury. Prosecutor has decided to let it go, all right? Prosecutors alleged during the trial that this police chief had a deep animosity against African Americans, and that hostility is what led him to strike the 18-year-old black male of Trenton during the hotel encounter. Officers who were there said the 18-year-old black male teen was not resisting arrest. They literally snitched on their own police chief. Now, do you really think these cops stood up against the police chief because this was the first time the police chief had done something like this? No, I guarantee you there were other stories connected to this chief. And some of the officers said, I'm willing to now cross that blue line and tell the truth about the chief. During both trials, okay? Remember, this came out. Nucera had a history of making derogatory remarks about black people, saying he wanted to unleash police dogs on spectators at a high school football game or high school football games, according to authorities. During both trials, they played profanity-laced excerpts for the jury from how many? 81 secret recordings made by fellow officers in which Nucera could be heard using a racial slur. In one, the police chief says, and I quote, "These N-word are like ISIS. They have no value. They should line them all up and mow them down. I'd like to be on the firing line. I could do it." Only one of the 12 jurors on the retrial was black. The jury for Nucera's first trial had 9 white and 3 black. In a statement, Marcus Sibley, president of the Southern Burlington County NAACP chapter, said he was not surprised by the dismissal. This is New Jersey. This is America. Here's another twist. The young man who was killed, who was at the middle of this, who was injured by this cop, died before he could testify. Died, okay? Unrelated, but died. Could not testify in this case. So the evidence was based on what the report said, what witnesses said, what cops said, and what these recordings said. Still enough to convict, still enough to convict, okay? The young man died in January. His mother, Felicia, says she believes the jury may have been able to reach a verdict if it could have heard from her son. She said the decision by prosecutors not to try this chief again was, and I quote, "so not fair at all for a monster." A lot of other information came out about this guy. It was very clear to many that he was in fact guilty, and many of the jury members obviously believed he was guilty as well. However, privilege, opportunity, benefit, privilege, opportunity, benefit. Ben, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like first and foremost, it takes an extreme degree of racism for other police officers to call out another police officer for being racist. But on top of that, we need to talk about systemic racism and how there are countless systems that are put in place to maintain racial inequalities in America. One of those being the jury selection process. Basically, the philosophy towards jury selection is anybody that knows anything about the news, systemic racism in America, anybody who's been a victim of racism, all of these different things could be used as sort of prior knowledge or bias excuses to say, oh, well, they can't be on a jury. And if you won't let people be on a jury, if they said that they've experienced racism or they think cops might be racist sometimes, then you're gonna get results like this. And it's just another layer of protection in place for like white supremacists like this guy. Like obviously I think that he definitely falls under that category, and our system is very much put in place to protect that person. And that's the unfortunate reality.
And remember, he was police chief of virtually an all white community. That community is where many of these jury members came from, and he was not able to be convicted by the jury. Prosecution tried multiple times.